Professional wrestling has always thrived on spectacle, larger-than-life characters, electrifying storylines, and moments that make fans leap out of their seats. Behind all the drama, however, lies something deeper: the grit, sacrifice, and relentless determination of men and women who give their bodies to this business. Among the many wrestlers who have risen to prominence in WWE over the past decade, few stories feel as raw and inspiring as that of Jermaine Haley, better known to fans around the world as Bronson Reed. Born on August 25, 1988, in Adelaide, Australia, Reed's journey is more than a tale of victories and titles. It's about resilience, recovery from crushing setbacks, and a belief in himself when everything seemed to be falling apart. Standing 1.83 meters tall and weighing in at 157 kilograms, Reed cuts an imposing figure the moment he steps between the ropes. Yet behind that powerhouse frame is a man who endured years of obscurity, battled through career-threatening injuries, and turned every setback into fuel for a comeback. His story is not just about wrestling, it's about the triumph of willpower over doubt. Growing up in Adelaide, dreams bigger than his hometown. Adelaide isn't the kind of city most people associate with professional wrestling. Far away from the bright lights of New York, Tokyo, or Toronto, the South Australian capital is better known for its arts scene and laid-back lifestyle. But for young Jermaine Haley, Adelaide was the place where his dream was born. Like many kids of his generation, he grew up glued to the television, watching the stars of WWE perform feats of athleticism and drama that felt larger than life. He didn't just see entertainment, he saw possibility. What made his dream unusual was that Australia's wrestling scene was small, fragmented, and often overlooked. While kids in the United States could join established wrestling schools, Australian hopefuls had far fewer resources. For many, the idea of breaking out of the local scene and making it to WWE felt like chasing a fantasy. But Haley wasn't wired to think small. When other kids his age were talking about what jobs they might do after school, he was already planning how he could step inside a wrestling ring. He began training under local veterans, showing up day after day in small, sweaty gyms where the mats were worn out and the crowds barely filled a basketball court. The travel was grueling, the pay almost non-existent, and recognition was scarce. Still, Haley stuck with it. Those early years in Australia gave him not just ring experience, but character, the kind of toughness that can only be forged when you're chasing a dream that seems impossible. It was there, performing in front of intimate but passionate crowds, that he developed his unique style. He wasn't just a big man who relied on brute strength. He surprised people with bursts of speed, unexpected agility, and a willingness to take risks that most men his size would never attempt. Slowly but surely, his reputation began to grow beyond the borders of Adelaide, and whispers started that perhaps this Australian heavyweight had something special. Breaking through to WWE, after years of grinding through the independent scene, Haley finally attracted the attention of WWE recruiters. For a kid from Adelaide, it felt like the dream had leapt off the television and into his hands. When he signed with WWE and debuted as Bronson Reed, it was the culmination of years of sacrifice. This wasn't just a contract, it was validation that every long trip, every night in a tiny venue, and every ounce of doubt he had overcome had been worth it. His early days were spent in NXT, WWE's developmental brand. But anyone who's followed wrestling knows that NXT is more than a proving ground. It's where the next generation of stars sharpen their edges before stepping onto the biggest stages. Reed stood out immediately. Fans weren't used to seeing a man of his size move with such explosiveness. His matches combined raw power with athleticism, a hybrid style that made him feel both classic and modern at the same time. What set him apart even more was his authenticity. He didn't try to mimic others or force himself into a box. Reed embraced who he was, flaws and all, and the audience connected with that. They saw not just a performer, but a man who had fought tooth and nail for every opportunity. Slowly, WWE began to recognize his potential, and Reed's momentum grew. For a time, he looked destined to be one of the brand's cornerstones. The vision, aligning with Seth Rollins. The biggest turning point of his career came in late 2024, when Reed was brought into the orbit of Seth Rollins, one of WWE's most dynamic and charismatic performers. Rollins had built a reputation not only as a world-class wrestler, but also as a storyteller who could elevate everyone around him. Together with other rising stars, they formed a faction called the Vision, a group that symbolized ambition, innovation, and dominance. For Reed, this was more than just a storyline. It was a chance to align himself with proven main event talent and step into a spotlight brighter than anything he had known before. Within the Vision, Reed was positioned as the powerhouse enforcer, the kind of wrestler who could swing the balance of any match with one devastating slam. This role transformed his career. Fans saw a new side of Reed, more vocal, more confident, and more layered. He wasn't just the big man anymore. He was a character with purpose, tied to one of the most important storylines in WWE. Being part of the Vision elevated him to Raw's main stage and solidified his presence as someone who belonged in the conversation of top-tier talent. Survivor Series. The injury that changed everything. But just as everything seemed to be aligning, disaster struck. At Survivor Series War Games in November 2024, Reed suffered an injury that would test every ounce of his resolve. In the chaos of the brutal match, he shattered his talus bone, a critical part of the ankle that bears weight and allows basic movement. To put it plainly, this wasn't just a wrestling injury. This was the kind of injury that could end a career. The pain was excruciating, but the real battle began afterward. Surgery was unavoidable, and recovery was daunting. For a man whose livelihood depended on his body, the injury was devastating. The talus isn't just about wrestling. It's about walking, standing, even the simplest motions of daily life. Suddenly, Reed went from being in one of WWE's hottest storylines to lying in a hospital bed wondering if he'd ever wrestle again. Rehabilitation was slow and grueling. What used to be simple, putting weight on his foot, moving around without pain, became monumental tasks. The physical pain was immense, but perhaps even heavier was the mental toll. Wrestling careers are fragile, and Reed knew how easily one injury could end everything he had built. Doubts crept in, and whispers of retirement lingered. But through it all, Reed held on to one thing: belief. He leaned on the words of Triple H, WWE's head of creative, and a man who understood the trials of wrestling better than most. Triple H reminded him that his story wasn't finished, that WWE still believed in him, and that when the time was right, he would come back stronger. Those words weren't just encouragement, they were lifelines. Reed carried them with him through every agonizing session of rehab, every sleepless night, and every moment when the future seemed uncertain. Resilience, redemption, and the future. What makes Bronson Reed's journey so inspiring isn't just the success he's had, it's the resilience he's shown when everything seemed to fall apart. Many wrestlers never return from injuries like his, but Reed refused to let it define him. His comeback wasn't just about stepping back into the ring, it was about proving to himself that he could rise again. Fans rallied behind him because they saw the humanity in his struggle. Reed wasn't just a character on television anymore. He was a man who fought through pain, fear, and doubt, only to come back stronger. His feud with Roman Reigns, one of the biggest stars in wrestling history, cemented his place as not just a survivor, but a legitimate global star. For Reed, every setback has become part of the story. From small venues in Adelaide to WWE's grandest stages, from near anonymity to standing toe-to-toe with legends, his path has been anything but easy. Yet perhaps that's what makes his journey so powerful. He represents the dreamer who refuses to quit, the fighter who turns pain into fuel, and the performer who reminds us why wrestling at its best is not just entertainment, it's inspiration. The rivalry that defined him. Roman Reigns. Every great wrestler eventually finds themselves in a career-defining rivalry, one that challenges them, elevates them, and forever leaves its mark on their legacy. For Bronson Reed, that moment arrived in 2025 when he stepped into the ring against none other than Roman Reigns, the self-proclaimed tribal chief, and one of WWE's most dominant champions of all time. The seeds of this feud were planted gradually, but when they finally bloomed, it became one of the hottest storylines in wrestling. What made it so captivating was the sheer contrast between the two men. Roman Reigns, already cemented as a megastar, carried himself with the air of inevitability, an aura of invincibility that had kept him at the top of WWE for years. In contrast, Reed came in as the hungry challenger, eager to prove that he was not just another contender, but someone who could strip away the myth of Reigns' dominance. Adding fuel to the fire, Reed boldly began referring to himself as the Tribal Thief. The nickname was not simply a jab, it was psychological warfare. It mocked Roman's identity as the tribal chief and struck directly at the foundation of his character. In doing so, Reed positioned himself not merely as an opponent, but as a genuine threat who was willing to attack the very symbol that defined Reigns' reign of supremacy. Fans immediately latched onto this defiance, sensing that this was more than just a typical challenger. It was a man declaring war on the very mythology of Roman Reigns. As the months unfolded, the tension escalated. Their confrontations weren't just physical, they were verbal and emotional. The backstage segments, the face-to-face encounters, and the heated exchanges in the middle of the ring all became must-watch television. Each altercation raised the stakes higher, with the sense that Reed was getting closer and closer to tearing down the walls of Roman's empire. The build-up was meticulous, and by the time WWE Clash in Paris rolled around, anticipation had reached fever pitch. The match itself was everything fans hoped for and more. It was brutal and hard-hitting, a true showcase of power against power. Both men traded devastating moves, with Reed refusing to back down even when the odds seemed stacked against him. There were moments where it genuinely appeared that Reed might pull off the unthinkable, that he might topple the tribal chief and change the landscape of WWE forever. Near falls had the audience on the edge of their seats, and each exchange built toward a crescendo of drama that defined the night. In the end, Roman Reigns emerged victorious. But as is often the case in professional wrestling, the result on paper told only half the story. The real victory belonged to Bronson Reed. He had proven beyond doubt that he could hang with one of the greatest of his generation. His performance earned him the respect not just of fans, but of critics and even peers within the industry. Though he didn't take the title, he walked away with something far more valuable: validation. The match with Reigns became a turning point, the moment where Reed was no longer viewed as simply a mid-card enforcer or background muscle. He was a main event caliber star, ready to stand shoulder to shoulder with WWE's very best. Building value, WWE's investment in Reed. By the time this rivalry unfolded, Reed had already been carving a steady path upward within WWE. Financially, his rise reflected his growing stature. By 2024, his net worth was estimated around $1.5 million, and his annual salary ranged between $175,000 and $177,000. While those numbers placed him in WWE's middle tier of earners, they were still a far cry from where he had started. For someone who once wrestled in small venues across Australia for little more than the love of the game, the financial security represented years of sweat, sacrifice, and an unshakable determination to succeed. When compared to the multi-million-dollar contracts of WWE's biggest names, those figures might seem modest. But the numbers told only part of the story. What truly mattered was WWE's investment in him. From merchandise sales to storyline placements, it was clear that the company saw something special in Reed. His inclusion in the faction known as The Vision, alongside stars like Seth Rollins and Bron Breakker, was not a coincidence. Nor was his positioning in high-profile rivalries like the one with Roman Reigns. These were deliberate moves designed to elevate his status and showcase him to wider audiences. Reed's appeal wasn't limited to his sheer physical presence, though that alone made him stand out in an era where agility often overshadowed power. What set him apart was his ability to connect with fans. He came across as authentic, a blue-collar fighter who carried himself with quiet intensity. Fans could relate to him, root for him, and believe in him. That connection, more than anything else, made WWE continue to bet on him as someone who could evolve into a true headliner. The resurgence of 2025. If 2024 was about establishing credibility, then 2025 was the year of resurgence for Bronson Reed. Despite suffering setbacks and the lingering shadows of injury, he found himself in the thick of WWE's biggest moments. His performances at marquee events such as SummerSlam and WrestlePalooza reignited his momentum and reminded the world of his potential. At WrestlePalooza, Reed teamed up with Bron Breakker in what became a landmark victory over the Usos, one of the most decorated tag teams in WWE history. For Reed, the win wasn't just another tally in the record books, it was symbolic. It signified that he had fully returned to form, overcoming the doubts that had surrounded him after his injury. Sharing that spotlight with Breakker also cemented their chemistry as allies, making them one of the most talked-about partnerships of the year. Meanwhile, his ongoing role in the Vision kept him at the forefront of Raw's programming. As the enforcer of the group, he became the backbone that balanced the charisma of Seth Rollins and the youthful fire of Bron Breakker. Together, they formed a faction that combined style, substance, and dominance. For Reed, it was the perfect platform, a way to showcase his evolving in-ring arsenal, while also revealing more of his personality and presence. Perhaps the most emotional chapter of 2025 came with Reed's scheduled return to Australia for WWE events. For a performer, there is nothing quite like stepping back onto home soil after achieving success on the global stage. For Reed, it carried even deeper meaning. This was the same country where he had once performed in tiny independent venues, often for little pay and even less recognition. Now he was returning as a WWE star, celebrated and respected. It was a full-circle moment, one that underlined just how far he had come. For the Australian fans who had supported him from the beginning, it was a chance to cheer one of their own on the world's biggest stage. For Reed himself, it was proof that the journey from Adelaide to the WWE spotlight had been worth every sacrifice. A testament to resilience. Looking back at Bronson Reed's journey, what stands out most is not the number of championships or main event appearances, but the resilience that defines his career. Time and again, he has faced obstacles that might have ended lesser careers. From the crushing blow of a career-threatening injury to the daunting task of standing opposite Roman Reigns, Reed has never flinched. Instead, he has turned each challenge into an opportunity to prove his worth. His story resonates deeply because it mirrors the struggles of everyday life. We all face setbacks, disappointments, and moments of doubt. But like Reed, what defines us is not the fall. It's how we rise again. His career has become a living testament to the power of determination, the importance of adaptability, and the belief that no obstacle is insurmountable when you refuse to quit. As Reed continues to evolve, fans can expect more unforgettable matches, more rivalries that test his limits, and more defining chapters in his story. He has already proven that he is more than just a wrestler. He is a symbol of perseverance. His journey, far from reaching its conclusion, feels like it is only beginning. With the support of his fans, the faith of WWE, and his own unrelenting will, Bronson Reed is destined to carve out a legacy that will endure long after the final bell rings. In the grand theatre of professional wrestling, where stories are told through blood, sweat, and roaring crowds, Bronson Reed stands as proof that the most powerful victories are not always measured in championships. Sometimes, the greatest triumph lies in the journey itself, the refusal to give up, the courage to rise after every fall, and the unyielding heart of a champion.